Good evening, everybody, and welcome to my esteemed guest. Good to have you back on the channel, Chris Shelton.
Hi.
You're back.
I am. I'm here. I'm back. Yeah. Hey.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm really glad to be here to have this opportunity to talk.
Well, I think the catalyst for this stream was I saw you did a video recently that was a message to people who are thinking of leaving Scientology, right? And I think that struck a nerve with a lot of people, struck a chord, sorry. And it was really impactful, and it just got me thinking about my recent trip to the States, where I saw some of the protesting in LA happening, and my experiences protesting on the ground here in the UK. And I thought it'd be fun to do a stream together about protesting. And I want to preface this by saying we're not the protest police. We're not here. This isn't a stream where we're telling people how they should or shouldn't be protesting. We're not going to be shooting people down or saying this is right, this is wrong. Like, we have freedom of speech. It's a fundamental human right, and that nobody should tell you how you should or shouldn't demonstrate that freedom of speech. Like, there's no right or wrong way to protest. I think you should protest in whatever way you think is the best way to protest. I'm an absolute supporter of that. What I thought might be interesting is to look on through our own experiences being ex-Scientologists, me being a Div Sixer, someone that came up face to face with people in the public when I was in Scientology who were shouting cult and Xenu and that sort of thing, and having witnessed some of the LA protesting in person now, and drawing on my experience protesting at St. Hill, the IES event, and with your video and the work that you've been doing, speaking directly to people leaving Scientology, I thought it might be interesting to just discuss protesting from that perspective, and messaging, language, all these things that are important to consider when trying to reach current Scientologists, because I think the message is different if you're trying to reach people currently in to if you're trying to stop people joining, for example. Would you agree with that, Chris?
I would. Absolutely, I would. And also, let me say real fast, because this is the first time we've attempted to do a stream to both of our channels at the same time using Restream. And I am going to say right off, I have no idea what I'm doing with Restreams. First time I'm using it. And so it did not stream to my channel. And I just deleted that off of there so I wouldn't have that distraction right now. It's totally fine. I can repost this later on my channel as necessary, but we'll figure that out some other time.
Okay. All right. Well, we can download it afterwards, and then you can post it on your channel.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. No worries at all. I didn't want that to be a distraction to what we're talking about. And getting back to what you just said, I absolutely agree with you. There is, the right to protest is in our Bill of Rights in our country, and the same way that we have freedom of speech. And I'm a very, very big advocate of those things. And so I've voiced opinions in the past about protesting, and I know that I have angered people about some of those opinions. And I'm capable of changing. And so that's kind of what I'm doing here today. Is I thought maybe I could be a little less, about it, and and try to be a little more constructive to the effort.
Well, I think what we could do is to look at the positives, right? So we don't want to like rip people apart and say they're doing it wrong, they're doing it right. I think what would be nice is to talk about things that have worked in the past and currently, and just focus on the positives, right? And saying why we think that works from our own experience. Like, so language, right, is maybe a first starting point. Is like, when I was in Scientology selling books, I was confronted with people every single day that would walk in and be like, you're in a cult, Xenu, you believe in aliens, and do you need help getting out? Like, blah, blah, blah. And it was quite aggressive. And as a Scientologist, I was like really put off by that. And I thought, these guys are so wrong about Scientology that they think we believe in Xenu and we're a cult. Like, it just made me want to try harder to prove them wrong about their assumptions. It never crossed my mind that person might be right or might be willing to help me leave if I wanted to. It just made me think everything Scientology told me is true about these SPs. So I think language is really important. And like your video where you kind of answered questions and you said, hey, you know, if you've got doubts, you are allowed to have doubts. You are allowed to think critically. That is the messaging that would have got through to me as a Scientologist.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I tried to put it together that way, because I agree with you completely. I was around during the 2008, anonymous protests, and I watched it all happen for over a year. And I watched it in different locations. I was in Los Angeles. I was in Twin Cities when there were anonymous protesters. I was up in Seattle, Washington when there were anonymous protesters. I got filmed. There's film of me on the internet in my Sea Lord uniform. Yeah, because they filmed me. The anonymous guys filmed me walking into the Seattle org. So I saw it on the ground in different ways in different places, and I just have opinions, right? And so I think that there is a way to communicate to people who are in that will seed plant or doubt, throw some food for thought in their direction. And there is the way to communicate to the non-Scientologists out there about what this is, and those are kind of two different messagings.
Yeah.
And there's also the purpose of the activity. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to raise awareness with the non-Scientology public, or are you trying to help the Scientologists or get them out, or get them to wake up? Or are you trying to kind of do both? You could hybrid it a little bit, and maybe there's messaging that would fit in both directions. So that's, I thought that was a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's so key, like the target of your protest. So, for example, if you're standing outside, the test center on Tottenham Court Road, and you're saying to people passing by, it's a cult, don't go in there, don't join. Like, as a Scientologist, that wouldn't get through to me as thinking, oh, these guys are there to help me leave. But it would stop people from joining, right? Because it would stop people going in. And I think that's a different target. That's a different message to, for example, the IES protest, where we're standing there saying, if you want help leaving, we're here to support you. Here's the Aftermath Foundation's phone number. It's not out ethics to put your mental health first. Like, we're very much trying to reach current Scientologists with that message, because people aren't going to join Scientology at the IES event. It's for people who are already in, who are going to be donating money. And I think that key difference in messaging is really important as to what your goal is. Both have merit. Like, you need to stop people joining, but you also need to help the people that are currently in. And I think the way you go about that is different, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because it's, well, as a marketing guy, right, you have your different demographics.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're talking about here. Is messaging is all about who the target audience is.
Absolutely. And so as someone who experienced the anonymous movement, what was that like from the inside as a Scientologist watching all of that? Like, what were your thoughts and opinions on it when you were in, and how was it kind of being handled from an internal perspective?
Yeah, there's a lot here. So I'll just be brief. I was on the RPF when the anonymous protests happened. So I was in the Scientology gulag, the prison system, and I was only witnessing this from afar. And we were told, not a lot, but we were told, because we could see the protesters there, right? And they were, they would go around and around packed. There were hundreds of these people who would show up at a time. And so the story to us was that these are people who have nothing else to do. We're basically equated to like a bunch of incels or something. They're low rent. They're being paid by big pharma. This is a campaign against Scientology. Pay no attention to it. These people have no idea what they're talking about. And I personally, I wasn't exactly, in a real good place as a Scientologist when I was on the RPF, right? It was a pretty bad situation, and I was pretty disaffected. But I wasn't so disaffected with the church that I thought these people running around in Guy Fawkes masks had anything useful to tell me. I did not think that at all. I thought they were foolish people, mostly probably kids who had no idea what they were talking about. That was my idea when I was in. And it took a few signs, and literally signs, right? Signage, to show me that maybe some of them did have some idea of what they were talking about. And this is always what stuck with me about those protests. As when I got off the RPF, it was still happening. And when I went out to Minnesota and went up to Washington, you're only going to get a couple seconds of attention from a Scientologist. So you've only got a very brief window to communicate something to them. And what was communicated to me in a couple of those signs was there were a couple space alien signs, which I thought were silly and really not. I didn't think about my beliefs and ideas about, Scientology as space aliens. So it just didn't connect with me at all. It just didn't. But the ones that did were the ones that said, did you get paid this week? When was the last time you saw your mom? Those were the two that I remember distinctly to this day that really hit me between the eyes, because that's where I lived. I'm not getting paid and this situation sucks. And I hadn't seen my parents. I hadn't seen my family in years and years. So those hit. And that's what I thought was the more effective kind of communication to Scientologists, because I also know that only about 5% of Scientologists make it up to the level where they even understand or have any idea what the word Xenu means.
Yeah. Well, this is something that I came across a lot in London, was people saying, you believe in Xenu, this overgalactic warlord. And I used to kind of laugh it off. And here's the response that I used to give. I think you'll find this funny, right? I used to say, look, I hear this a lot. People say Xenu, and I honestly, I find it funny because L. Ron Hubbard used to write science fiction. Like, that's how he earned his money, that funded his research into the mind. And people incorrectly think that we believe in his science fiction writing, and that's the scripture of the church. And of course, that's talking about aliens and stuff. And it's just not true. Like, they're two separate things. And I've worked in Scientology for however long, and I've got access to all of the books in the library, and I've read and studied, and I've never seen anything about Xenu. It's just a misunderstanding of the difference between his fiction and his work on the mind. And 9 times out of 10, people would be like, oh, that kind of makes sense. Okay, all right, fair enough. Maybe that is true. And that's how I would look at it. I would never think like, there must be something about aliens and Xenu and all of this, because most Scientologists don't know about that. Now, there was probably part of me that thought, well, if that is OT3, well, it does sound bonkers, but maybe there's something to it that when I get there, I'll understand it. There's probably more context around it to what these guys understand. And if there is aliens, I'm sure Hubbard will explain it in a way that it will make sense, but I'm not ready for it. At the moment, it's kind of how I viewed it. Did you have a similar sort of perception?
Absolutely, because what the other thing we would be told is that on the internet, people were posting either make-believe stuff that they were just making up, pulling out of their ass or whatever, to say about what we believed in Scientology, or it was squirreled versions of the OT material, right? So it was only half or parts of the story. And as you mentioned, you're not getting the context. And so, you could take things in Scientology. And I think you and I both knew as Scientologists that it would not be hard to take some parts out of History of Man or, some of the bulletins, which are not confidential. Anybody can read that stuff, and take it out of context and make it seem weird and blow it up to be, this bizarro thing. And we understood what Hubbard really meant. And we knew, oh, come on now, that's not what he was really saying. The funny thing on you know, looking back at it now, of course, is no, that is what he was actually saying. But
Yeah.
you know, but when you're in the mindset, right, your rational machinery is working overtime to make all this stuff make sense, not poke holes in it.
Yeah.
So people on the outside are poking holes in it, and my mind is working full time to shut those people down because I know this is the truth. And so, you know, so that's what you're talking to when you're talking to Scientologists.
Yeah, and I think the anonymous movement did such a good, like, there's pros and cons to it, right? Like, it was great that it elevated the game, right? It got thousands, if not millions, of people talking about Scientology that had never heard of it before. Lots
Yep.
of press attention, lots of interest in it. People who had never heard of Scientology are suddenly now aware that there's this cult here that believes in Xenu and aliens and all of that. Now, that was a positive in that more people were aware about it, but I think that what it's done is given it this reputation. I find this a lot where I tell people I'm an ex-Scientologist and they go, oh, that's like that crazy alien cult that believes in Xenu and Tom Cruise and all of that. And you know, it's really important for public perception and awareness, yes, but I think that the messaging now perhaps could change for people to understand that it's an abusive, harmful organization, not just this space alien belief, right? And the way I think we do that is through the messaging with the protests, like standing there shouting cult, you know, believe in Xenu. Yeah, it stops people joining, but I think it's really important to kind of take the next step and help people understand, no, this is an organization that's harming people. It's not just about the wacky beliefs that most Scientologists don't even know about, right?
I completely agree with you, and I think that is adequate or is good messaging for the general public. This is where we kind of get into that hybrid messaging, like what would work in both camps, and pointing out abuses or overbearing, dominating behavior, financial rapaciousness, especially. They are aware of that inside Scientology. There are public Scientologists, staff, and Sea Org members who disagree with the sort of vulture culture, suck up all your money with a high-powered vacuum, take out credit cards, take out another one, take out another one. There are people in Scientology who get sick and tired of that real fast and don't like that aspect of being a Scientologist, but they put up with it because the services are so amazing and they feel so blown out, you know, when they're done with a session. And so they're willing to kind of roll with it and jump through these hoops they have to jump through, but they don't like it. And so if protesters are communicating to that inside and telling people on the outside, hey, look, authoritarian, abusive, you know, money sucking organization, they're being accurate in both senses, you know.
What are your thoughts on using Hubbard quotes and terms and such when protesting? Because my thinking on this is, obviously everyone's journey out of Scientology is different, but for a lot of people, they quit the organization in their heads before they ditch the belief. So a lot of people become independent Scientologists, a lot of people don't, but their first sense of disaffection is based on the organization or Miscavige, but they still believe that if it's applied correctly, Scientology will work. And the problem is that, you know, the Sea Org are not doing it right, or Miscavige has changed it or whatever. So do you think that signage and messaging using Hubbard quotes to demonstrate how perhaps actually it's been twisted or changed by Miscavige would help people on their journey out, even if they still cling on to the beliefs, to leave the church?
Yes, I do. Very much so. There isn't a more powerful source of truth for Scientologists than L. Ron Hubbard, right? Followed up with David Miscavige. And so if you can quote them and then show the hypocrisy or the lie in that, and you can do it quickly, right? Like on a sign or something, that's golden. That's golden. And there are many, many interesting Hubbard quotes that could apply. The Debbie Cook email was pretty much nothing but L. Ron Hubbard chunky quotes. A lot of that's not going to fit on a sign, but parts of them will. And those communicated to Scientologists. She sent that email out. it hit me as a Sea Org member. I was like, God damn, she's right. Hubbard wrote this, and yet we're doing this. Hubbard wrote this, and yet we're doing that, right? And so I think that can be very useful to sort of penetrate the Scientology barriers.
Yeah, I think it's so important to consider what Scientologists are being told about protesters, right? So,
Mm.
if you, as a Scientologist, you're told these protesters are, big angry SPs, they're covertly hostile, they just want to get in the way of your success and they want nothing but to put you down, and they're being paid by big pharma and all of this. And so you kind of have to think strategically about what they're being told and what their perception is of us. And that's why I find it really successful when we're out there being kind, nice, courteous, wishing people a good day, enjoy the event, you look nice, and not in a kind of a sort of sarcastic way, but in a genuinely just showing them that we're nice people, we just want to help, because that starts kind of planting the seed of doubt, because people who see that will go in, they'll be like, hold on, they weren't shouting, they weren't angry, they weren't nasty, they were actually quite nice. And that's not what I've been told an SP is meant to be. And that in itself, I think, can start the cogs turning for someone, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the emotion is key to how people are going to receive you and receive your messaging. And it will definitely put them into a surprised place to get some compassion from a stranger, right?
Yeah.
But again, but this is also where it's contributory to it. The wording is also important, right? Even, no matter how nicely you tell somebody you're in a cult, it's not going to arrive, right? And so again, the messaging is important, but yes, I absolutely believe that the tone is. They're apparently now, and you probably already know this, but they're apparently now signing legal documents within the church as part of the enrollment process and all of that, that if there are protesters outside, they, as Scientologists, are to remain silent, not engage, not get involved, and not in any way communicate with the protesters. Not react to them, not argue with them, not get into it with them. So official church policy that they actually have to sign off on to be a Scientologist is, I will not engage with them. And this is a difference from how it used to be.
That's crazy
so the
that it's
church
in a
has
contract.
changed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's mad, because communication is the universal solvent, Chris, and
exactly.
how am I meant to confront and shatter these SPs if I have to just ignore them? That's wild that they're actually putting it in the contract. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I just found out fairly recently, and it speaks to a change in strategy with the church and how it is approaching this now, which I think is kind of an important thing to know. They're not, for decades, from the 90s and the 2000s, and early 2010s, I suppose, the church's stance on protesters was, sort of, probably anonymous is when this started to change, is attack them, go after them. What are your crimes? When did you kill a baby? This kind of Jenna Elfman sort of approach. And they used to be really in your face about it. There's a lot of videos online about that, to the point that now people who protest expect that, but they're not getting it, because Scientology has actually learned something and changed through this whole process, which is interesting, because Scientology doesn't tend to learn a lot over the years, but this is something they have responded to.
Well, strategy is such a big thing. If you want to stand out there, protest, do a couple of live streams, once a week or however often you want to, and that's kind of it. That's the limit of your participation. Fantastic. That's great. It gets the word out there, gets more people interested in the topic and aware that this is a harmful organization. But for those of us who are kind of in it for the long game, and trying to think strategically, you have to remember that Scientology think strategically. For them, this is war, right? The Office of Special Affairs have probably hundreds of people who are dedicated, 14, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, tasked with combating protesters and shutting people like you and me down. And so they're not in a rush to get rid of us, right? They will do whatever they can to quietly prod, to make our lives a misery, to just consistently be a problem, to wear us down to the point where we give up. That's how they operate, whether it's through legal threats or contacting and harassing family and friends or your workplace or kicking your front door in, whatever. Like, they are all in it for the long game. So we have to think about it in the same way of like, okay, what's going to really impact them? Protesting outside an org is great. The IES protest is fantastic. It does send a message. But if you think about the long term, like, how do we really hit them where it hurts, if that makes sense? Like, what do they care about? And they care about, as an organization, especially Miscavige, press, right? The more press we can get, the more people are aware of it. And
Yep.
the more people, the more that people know about it, the more likely it is that something like government will step in to do something about it. And
That's
government
right.
agencies and politicians aren't going to step in and start meddling with religious freedom and beliefs and all of that, unless there's a clear demand among the electorate that people really care about this. So you have to think kind of a couple of steps ahead. Does that make
That's right.
sense?
I agree completely. And strategy is really important. And a lot of protesting is pretty reactionary, and it's understandable, right? People get pissed off, they want to go do something, and they go do it. And again, nothing wrong, right? But for the long game look of this, once you kind of find out more about it and you realize there's a long history to this, actually goes back to the 1990s. With the first internet sort of protesting or postings, when OT3 first got online and stuff like that. And I mean, there's a whole backstory to all of this, which is absolutely fascinating. You can see that in the 90s and in the 2000s, Scientology took actions against protesters or against critics, victims, that ended up in the long run making Scientology worse off. They did things that were not good for themselves. They shot themselves in the foot many, many, many times. Helped establish internet precedents about freedom of speech, for example, and copyright law, and the fact that you can post OT3 online and not get taken to court for it. That's Scientology kind of helped make sure we have that right. Because they overstepped and were so, going after their critics. Same with the anonymous stuff, right? They're stalking and these anonymous protesters and following them home and stuff like that. And they overstepped and they ended up looking like the bad guys. And so strategically, if you know that, then you know that the best way to protest is protest in such a way that they don't see it coming, don't know what you're doing, don't know what you're going to do, right? You always kind of take them off guard a little bit. They expect the hostility. They expect the anger, so do something different. And try to get them, this is sort of a broad sort of theme for me, but I thought that this might be worth saying, is that in protesting, do things that are going to get Scientology to show the world who they really are.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite things in the recent past with this whole protest ban PSPO thing is I've given Scientology the opportunity to shoot themselves in the foot, and they took the opportunity, right? So going into the IES protest, now this is different to people who are live streaming every day outside Norg, because that's like ad hoc day-to-day protesting. Because
Yep.
the IES protest is like an organized thing that happened, twice. It's perhaps an annual thing. It's like a one-off event. I was very aware that Scientology will be looking for any way they possibly can to trip us up. So I went to great efforts to learn the local laws, the rules on what you can and can't say, where you can and can't stand, the private land versus public land, signage and all of this, and negotiated with the police and the council as to what our plans were. I did a site visit. I went down with the police, the head of police in the local area, and said, look, this is what we want to do. This is where we want to stand. This is our messaging. And this is how many people we expect. And this is what Scientology are going to tell you that we're saying and doing, but it's not our intention. That's not our plan at all. So that when we were there on site and Scientology called them and said, they're shouting obscenities and they're abusing and harassing us, the police were like, well, no, they haven't done any of that. And actually, you're creating more problems than the protesters. And then that escalated into the protest ban, when they filed for a ban against protesting and said they shouldn't be allowed to gather outside St. Hill. It should be banned because it's hate speech and harassment. I went to great lengths to speak to the council, show them the evidence on the website of what our rules are, that we don't tolerate hate speech. And we're just messaging the people currently in. Our messaging is that we're there to support them and help them if they choose to leave. We're not protesting their so-called religious beliefs. We're protesting the behaviors, and we don't have anything against people who are Scientologists. We just want them to be aware that there's a community here to support them. And that was so important, because the council saw that we had the best intentions. We were playing by the rules. We had meetings in organizing the protest, talking about safety, high vis jackets, how do we look after ourselves, and all of this. And at the end, the council were like, yeah, look, these guys are not creating any problems. And all of the problems Scientology were complaining about are all things that they've created, and they have the solution to fix them. And that only happened because of the care and the time that went into our messaging, how we're going to do it. And playing that long game was like thinking ahead of, what is Scientology going to say about us? So how do we make sure we don't give them ammunition?
That's right. Absolutely the case. Let me answer one thing somebody asked a bit ago in the comments. As far as I understand, this signing this contract thing, or this agreement in order to not talk to protesters and stuff, is a pretty recent thing within the church. And I don't know that it's filtered out to all of the orgs yet even. But from what I was told, this was very much the case at Flag, and I think in PAC. And as far as the other orgs go, you can't necessarily quote me on that one, but it's they might be piloting it or something in the Sea Org areas before they send it out to the outer orgs. Not sure.
Yeah,
not sure on that.
I was going to say, actually, talking about different locations, that's really important with messaging as well, because a mistake that I've seen quite a lot is people protesting outside Class 5 orgs, where the staff sign 2.5 or 5 year contracts. They work Monday to Friday, 9 till 6, or they do the evenings and weekend shifts. So they have their own lives outside Scientology. They're not bound by a Sea Org contract. They have to make a living outside of Scientology, and they have a lot more freedom to come and go as they please, as in comparison to Sea Org members. And I got this when I was on staff, people coming up to me going, you can leave whenever you want, just, blink twice. And I was like, you have no idea how this works, because I work 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, Monday to Friday. I come in, I live at home, I leave, and no one's stopping me leaving. You are so wrong about how Scientology works, because the messaging would have worked if it was a Sea Org staff member. And I think that's really important to note, where you're protesting, who are the people that are going to be there. Like Flag is OTs, senior Scientologists, people who have spent a lot of money, and Sea Org members. LA, it's mostly Sea Org. Whereas like a city level org like London or Birmingham or Manchester, they are Class 5 staff. So they're under much less restriction, I think, than the Sea Org. So the way you approach them perhaps should be a little bit different.
Absolutely. And this is really understanding the nature of the beast that you're protesting. A little understanding of the structure and the layout of this really can go a long way towards the effectiveness of the messaging. I'm just really reiterating what you just said, but I agree completely.
Yeah.
Class 5 has a whole different set of problems from what the Sea Org has, and a whole different set of responsibilities. What they're trying to do with Scientology is different from what the Sea Org is trying to do. The Sea Org is your Vatican. It's your Pope. It's your bishops. It's your like high level guys. When you're talking to the city level, like here in Denver, You're talking to people who, maybe they're not making a lot of money. They're putting a lot of time in, a lot of hours, but it's not like the Sea Org situation. And they're not here in Denver on a billion-year contract. So their mindset about their commitment and their responsibilities is different, very, very different from, the billion-year deal with the Sea Org.
Yeah. And I think, like, thinking strategically as well, like protesting Scientology is one thing. The abuse is stopping people joining, reaching out to current Scientologists, offer them support, let them know that the aftermath is there to help them, and so on. But one thing I would really love to see more of, and this isn't to say that no one's doing it, there definitely are people doing this, but I wish more people would get involved in it, is protesting in a kind of longer term strategic way. For example, if Scientology lost their tax exempt status tomorrow, that would have huge implications and ramifications for the church that would take years and years for them to respond to, and a lot of Scientologists would leave. It would have huge repercussions. But the only way that's going to happen is if you apply pressure on the IRS to do that. And for example, why is nobody protesting the IRS, right? Writing to them and saying, hey, you should revoke Scientology's tax exemption? Because although that might not be an immediate quick win, just sending an email to your state representative or to the IRS, the more messages like that they get, the more it becomes clear there's a real public push here and concern amongst the electorate that Scientology's tax exempt status should be at least reviewed. And I wish that there were more people protesting the organizations and the groups of people that would have an impact on Scientology as an organization rather than just Scientologists. Do you get what I mean?
Absolutely. In fact, one idea, it's not my original idea, but I've talked about it a few times because I think it's such a good idea. I think John Atack came up with this. I'm not sure. Is protesting at the businesses of the whales, the Scientology whales, the people who are actually funding Scientology. Tom Cummins' place is out in Italy, I guess, but there are a ton of American businesses, especially in Clearwater, by the way, and Los Angeles. Those are your two major conclaves of Scientologists. And there are tons of Scientology businesses, meaning actual companies that are run pretty much exclusively by Scientologists, owned by Scientologists. And the money that those companies make is funneled into the church through IAS donations and service donations and things like that, to the tune of millions and millions and millions of dollars. So a strategic way of approaching this problem of this, mega rich corporation that's sucking money up with a high-powered vacuum is cut off their income supplies. Well, protesting those those sources of income would be a fantastic way to show up to people who don't ever see any of this.
Yeah.
I come to your business and there's a bunch of people protesting like, what? That would be kind of I think it would be a baller move personally.
Yeah. I think it's probably easier as well for because there's a lot of people in this community who have never been in Scientology, who never-ins as they're called, people who just want to support the cause, who are happy to protest but have never been in Scientology. And it can be quite difficult and quite daunting to get a message to a current Scientologist if you're protesting outside a Sea Org base, for example, if you don't have the knowledge and the understanding of Hubbard policy and, and how it works and how they speak and what messaging does and doesn't work. And there's a great comment here about, former members giving more input to protesters on this sorts of thing. I think protesting places like local government or the IRS, the tax office, those sorts of things is an easy way for people who have no Scientology experience themselves to make a real difference, because all they need to know is that the facts and the information about Scientology's tax avoidance schemes and the fraud and all of this to protest effectively government officials that can make a change. And you're not going to get caught out by Scientologists questioning you about policy that you don't know, for example. Right? What are your thoughts?
No, absolutely. You're not going to, it would actually be a venue that would be a lot safer and a lot more interesting of a venue to protest, say, a Scientology business, right? If you went down to, I don't know if it's, I doubt it's still around, but, like the old Survival Insurance or something, right? Or Sterling Management, some of these operations that are just pure Scientology. Oh, yeah. What's that? MGE. Right? Or Postcard Mania, those people in Clearwater, right?
Yes.
Whoever goes down to those places and protests. But man, would that be awesome. And you would also have less church interference in what you're trying to do, because they don't have OSA offices down at these businesses, or at the IRS or other government facilities as well, because there's city, state, county, and federal government offices that could and should be hearing a lot more about the dangers and abuses of Scientology, because those are the bodies we want doing something about this, but we're not telling them to do anything about it, right? We're sort of expecting that some kind of media thing is going to somehow seep over to them, and they're somehow going to get energized to do something about this. And I think, meeting with your local and state representatives could go somewhere. It might not. I obviously, especially these days, some of our government representatives are a little out of touch, but at the city and county level, they tend to be a little bit more interested in listening. I mean, here with the Aftermath, we met with the mayor of a local town here, and he was nothing but supportive of our efforts to shut down Scientology influence there. So I think that there's some mileage that could be gotten from some of that.
Yeah, and thinking again strategically about it, like in the UK, for example, the current saga with the planning permission, right? Like last year, they put up this massive marquee without planning permission. It's 45,000 square foot, and I reported it, and it resulted in a planning contravention notice. But the way I did that, I didn't just write to the council and say, "Hey, these guys are a cult that are abusing people," and blah 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 blah. What I did is research the laws and went to them and said, "Hey, look, I'm not asking you as the planning department to rule on whether Scientology should be allowed to hold their event or be a religion or whatever. I'm just saying this is the planning law. They've done this. Here are the pictures, and they've broken the rules here. And I'd like you to enforce the planning rules as you should." And that's what I mean, thinking strategically about like who can you use to apply pressure on them, because what that's done is made it a lot more difficult for them this year, because the council are watching with hawk eyes what they're doing, and the moment they start building that tent, the council are on it, and that's making it more difficult for Scientology. And all it's doing is giving them an opportunity to show them up for who they are. If Scientology were to apply for planning permission for this big marquee, they'd probably get it, and I would support that, because why shouldn't they be allowed to have a marquee on their property? But by doing it the right way, that means there are assessments on the local community, on the environment. There's health and safety checks that need to be done, and it's done in the way that it should be done. And Scientology think they're above the law, and they're not doing it that way. And that's the point. It's allowing them to demonstrate themselves to the council that they think they're above the law. And all they needed to do is apply for planning permission. But it's just thinking strategically. It's like, I'm not standing there outside the council office with a placard. I'm emailing them, pointing out where Scientology have messed up. And that's just helped the council to see where Scientology are failing to comply.
Exactly. It's using our structures and rules and sort of, the societal framework, I guess you could say, against them, and forcing them to be held to the same standards that, ironically, they hold the protesters to, right? Well, you can't stand there, but you can stand, you have to stand over there because the law says. Well, you just reverse it right back on them. Well, the law says you have to apply for a permit, motherfucker. So where's the permit?
Like when they're trying to say through the PSPO thing, it's like they're filming us and they shouldn't be filming and photographing us. And I just said, okay, well, firstly, they're filming us. They've got dozens of CCTV cameras and people standing there with cameras, and we have no objection to that because you're allowed to film in a public place. So if Scientology want us to stop filming our protest activity, we kindly request that Scientology also stop stop filming us? And they went completely quiet and took that out of their complaint. It's just using, their own tactics against them, right?
That's right. Exactly that. Exactly. Because you understand the nature of the beast you're protesting as well, of course, right? Which is that that Scientology internally despises the law. They don't they don't care about what the law says until it can be used against someone else. Then they care. Otherwise, they don't. Permits and applications and registrations and doing it right and planning things ahead, they don't care about any of that stuff. It's always make it go right. And that's how they operate. So you can catch them out because of their sloppy-minded, sort of contempt for our laws and structures. And this is kind of that on that theme of strategy of like showing the world who Scientology really is by making Scientology be Scientologists, right? I mean, that I'm wording it goofily, but it's that kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's like playing a chess game, right? It's thinking a couple of moves ahead. And this is what I love about the marquee thing is we know how Scientology operate, right? They know that the IES event is going to happen in October because that's when the anniversary is. But we also know that the actual date is never decided until 4 weeks beforehand because Miscavige suddenly says, right, we're going to do it on this day. And then they go for that date and nothing can change that date. So by, for example, replying with to the protest ban thing by saying, look, if we had more notice, then we could minimize the impact that the whole event has on the local community. The council then said, yeah, look, most major events that attract thousands of people to the local area are planned months in advance. If you were to give us 8 weeks notice of the date, we can ensure that the police are informed, we have a traffic management plan, and therefore it makes it easier for everyone. And then therefore the protests will probably be less disruptive. So the council are then applying pressure on Scientology to give them 8 weeks notice. Now, we know that Scientology won't give them 8 weeks notice because they don't have 8 weeks notice themselves. It's just on David Miscavige's whim that when he decides. So what we're doing is using the chess game to apply pressure to force the hand because Miscavige won't want to cow down to what the council are saying and give 8 weeks notice. So every year he doesn't do that. It just makes them look bad. It's allowing them the opportunity to show themselves up, right?
That's exactly right. And it's also, by the way, as a sort of, you won't see this, so you won't necessarily get the satisfaction of watching this happen, but internally, the more pressure that is put on Scientology from the outside, either through, official pressures like from the council and this kind of thing, or from protesting, it revs up the pressure inside, and it frustrates, angers, and even enrages the executives and the people involved, and so their Scientology is showing. And this creates ex-Scientologists, right? So,
some SEAL members are going to get punished for protest flap. And as much as I don't ever want people to be punished, like sometimes that's what sends people over the edge because they get sent to the RPF and thinking, why am I going to the RPF for this, something I've had no impact on, nothing to do with me? This guy's decided to protest and now I'm being punished for it. Sometimes that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And that's what allows them to decide that they want to leave, right?
That's right. That's right. Exactly. It's some kind of moral outrage or moral dilemma is usually what sparks it. So, so that's what you're trying to create in people, right? Is some kind of moral dilemma, some kind of questioning, some kind of what the hell? Why am I putting up with this? Why is this going on? I didn't think it was that. I thought it was this other thing. That's where the beginning of the end starts, right?
And the solution to most of the problems is for them to just follow the local rule, apply for planning permission, do what they're supposed to do, and a lot of the problems go away. But they'll never do that, which is just ridiculous.
No, they are. Isn't it kind of shocking from the inside I'm sure it was this way in the London org, you tell me, but I was constantly frustrated as a Sea Org member in LA for many, many years, being involved with events that we put on at the Shrine Auditorium and on the base, at this point of the lack of planning, the last minute of everything. And to the point that I developed I said inside the church, the one thing about events that never changes is that everything changes. It's like all to the last minute, you're changing everything up. And they're just horrible. I mean, they are really, if you could appreciate how bad they are at this, it is really an opportunity. It's a chink in their armor to take advantage of. And I'm sure there's creative ways to do so that we're not even thinking of right now, that could deliver some great PR victories for protesters in that, in taking advantage of Scientology's lack of ability to plan and have foresight and initiative to do things long term. Yeah. They just struggle constantly with that.
Yeah, precisely. I think the more opportunities to show that to the world, the better. Like public perception, we talked about earlier, what I'm on a bit of a mission at the moment to try and change the perception of the public from Scientology being this crazy space alien cult that Tom Cruise believes in, to people recognizing, no, this is a harmful organization that is abusing people all around the world in every city in which it operates. Yep. And that's a big task because, most people at this stage have heard about Scientology, but they just think of it as some crazy cult or Xenu aliens or Tom Cruise. They don't think of it like, Jonestown, right? As, a horrific thing that has happened. Now, obviously, Scientology hasn't had a Jonestown moment, but they are definitely abusing and harming people every single day. And any little thing that we can do to change that perception, I think the better. And one of the steps to do that is, like you were just talking about, showing up Scientology for who they are by getting stories in the press about how they're refusing to comply with local planning law. That's a story about Scientology's mentality and behavior, not about their wacky alien beliefs. And I think the more of that we can do from all the different angles, the better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me bring up something that probably be controversial. It's not any kind of like, I'm not trying to be critical of anybody here. I'm just want to point out something, which is that if we're going to rely on the police or government apparatus such as the IRS or the Revenue Office or Child Protective Services or other institutions that might be interested in investigating violence or financial fraud, then we're going to have to be friendlier with these groups and institutions, right? To get them as allies, not antagonize them. And like I said, I know this isn't necessarily going to be universally popular to say, but because please understand, I am no fan of the police. Not the music group, the actual police, right? I love the Police, the band, but the police are not my friends. I don't put a lot of trust or faith in the police, and I don't like the institution of policing for a lot of reasons. And I've laid all this out on my show many times. But if we want the police to be on our side, then a little friendliness would go a long way in that direction, right? To get them on board as allies. And I believe that this is possible to do, but I know it's not possible to do if we treat the police the same way we treat Scientologists, right? And act as though the police are on the side of Scientology, because after doing this for years and years and years and being involved in all the feedback on this for years and years and years that I have been, I have not really actually found it to be the case that the police are so much on Scientology's side as they are between a rock and a hard place of Scientology has the same rights you and I do. And the police have to be the middlemen in that. And so it can appear that there's favoritism. And then, of course, we do know that in LA, and I believe in Clearwater, the cops do get paid for off-duty service working for the church. And so that does bias them, which means we need to work even harder to make them allies rather than make them enemies, because if push comes to shove, I think we're going to want the police and, again, other government regulatory bodies like Child Protective Services on our side. And that means being very factual, being very open, and working with them, not against them.
Yeah. I
Like I said, I
agree.
know it's controversial, and I know I'm going to upset people saying that, but
No, I agree. I think it's about building relationships, like, right? And that's the difference
Mhm.
between, you know, if you were to be live streaming every day outside an org or whatever, that's not an organized event protesting. So it's harder to do this, what I'm about to
Mhm.
say. But with a one-off or an organized thing like the IES protest, you know, I went to the police ahead of time and said, hey, we're planning to protest. Legally, I don't have to give you notice. I can just show up, we can protest, we can do our thing, don't have to tell you anything. But
Yeah.
in the interests of fairness and wanting to demonstrate our goodwill and trying not to create issues or problems and to try and minimize the disruption, here are our plans. And hopefully by telling you ahead of time, you know what to expect. And then you can assign however many police you think need to be there. And you know what we want to do, what we want to achieve. You know that we're not going to try and jump the fence. We're not going to try and attack anybody. We're not going to harass people. Scientology will claim that we're doing all of those things. But by building that relationship ahead of time, the police on the day are a lot friendlier because they know what we're about. They know what our intentions are. They've been given the brief beforehand. They know what to look out for. So they treat us in a different way. Whereas when I've protested without giving them warning, for example, outside London Org for the March 13th LRH birthday protest, they showed up and they were a bit more standoffish because they're like, hold on, there's a group of people here protesting. You know, is it a violent protest? What are your intentions? You know, Scientology has said you're harassing them. Like, and through a conversation, it was de-escalated. But because they didn't have that prior knowledge, they were instantly looking at us in a different way. So I
Yeah.
think it's important to build relationships along with your protesting with all of the government agencies.
I cannot highlight and underline that enough. I think what you just said is just gold, because first impressions matter, right? And we know from influence psychology that the first choice or the first impression that somebody gets of something is going to be the strongest one. And police are human. So if they show up and they're expecting trouble because they've been told that there's trouble happening here, that's the lens that they're going to see you as a protester through. You're a troublemaker, and I'm here to investigate what kind of trouble you're making. Whereas if you head that off by being the person who's creating the first impression, right? No, here's what we're doing. Here's what I'm about. Here's why we're doing this. They get the call from Scientology, just like you tell them they will. And they're not coming with guns out, right?
Yeah.
So,
And there's
yeah.
also a thing to be said about the difference in cultures as well. Like having seen it now in LA myself versus here, like the police are different. There's different cultures. The
Yeah.
police are very different over there to how they are here. They were different when I protested in France, right? They were a lot more
Mm,
heavy-handed there. You know, there's a
yeah.
comment here that says the other problem with the police in the US these days is they're being pushed by the administration to treat any kind of protest as a riot. Like the pressures and the response and the just the culture is different. So the way that I protest in the UK is going to be different to how people protest in the US, rightfully so. And you have to take all of that into consideration when you go to protest. Is understanding the context around how certain police forces or whatever are going to respond.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. A little knowledge on this stuff goes a long way. And thanks, Peter, on that comment on the fact that they actually held a meeting and stopped hiring the police because it appears to be favoritism. I'm really happy to hear that. I did not. Nobody's told me about that. So
That's
so
great.
thanks for
Like in
that.
the UK, when London Org was opened as an ideal org, there was a huge piece. This is before my time, but there was a huge piece in, I think it was the Guardian, about how the City of London Police took I think it was 6,000 or £10,000 £5,000 check from Scientology. And because of the backlash, they changed, and the City of London Police now have a rule that no police officer or police force in London is allowed to accept any sort of gift or hospitality from Scientology, because it made them look so bad. And that was a great outcome. That was because of the press. The protesting got the message out there. The building a relationship with the journalists to get the article out there resulted in the change that means that the police now don't take gifts from Scientology. It sounds like a similar thing happened in LA, right? Is building relationships, working and thinking strategically, in addition to showing up there with your signs and banners, I think is how we're going to really progress this movement, in my opinion.
I agree completely. Let me, for some reason, I thought this might be important to say, so let me throw this out there too, is because we've been talking about, liaising or making allies with, regulatory bodies and stuff. There is another factor, whole different thing with this too, which is the cultural zeitgeist, you could say, the sort of mood of the culture at the time can do a lot towards getting effective action taken against groups like Scientology. And let me quickly say NXIVM. If you're familiar with NXIVM, Keith Raniere, he's in jail now. He's not coming out for the rest of his life. And he was a very L. Ron Hubbard-esque kind of guy. He took a lot from Scientology, in fact, to form up his own little business cult. And the law enforcement, the New York State Attorney General and various other law enforcement agencies were given all the information about Keith and NXIVM and the abusive stuff they were doing 10 years before the FBI moved on the guy. The thing that actually prompted action was the Me Too movement happened. So that was in the press, and an article was put out by the New York Times about Keith and the abuses on the Me Too zeitgeist. And that's had a lot to do with why the FBI got off their ass and the New York Attorney General's office got off their asses and decided to actually do something about all that information they'd been given. So there are the circumstances, I guess is what I'm kind of saying, are things to look for, and look for opportunities to use those things to message going, to kind of prompt messaging and action against groups like Scientology.
And I think like that is so clear that there's this social change happening. Like when I was in LA, outside the test center, right? The test center has become like a cultural attraction, right? Like we were standing there protesting it or like live streaming, and there were kids walking past being like, oh, it's the place I've seen on TikTok, it's a cult, right? People were stopping to take photos outside the test center, not because they're interested in Scientology, but because they've seen all these videos on TikTok of people protesting there. And I think in one way it's great because, all of these live streamers have raised awareness among this whole demographic of people that haven't been reached before. These kids on TikTok, like, it's great. They are all aware now that Scientology is a cult. Fantastic. But what I'm looking at is the next step. How do we educate those people? It's not just a cult, it's a harmful, abusive organization. Like, how do we educate those people? What's the next step? I think that social change is really happening. It's great to see these kids engaged in this topic in a similar way the anonymous movement engaged a whole new demographic of people. But it's like, cool, yes, they're aware, they're taking pictures, but are they writing to their state representative? Are they actually going to do something about it? They might not feel they want to. Fair enough. But how do we get them to want to take action rather than just talk about it?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to rain on anybody's parade. I really don't. I mean, it's not a completely useless activity, but I tell you, I have signed more petitions in the last 12 years. I don't know that that's the avenue. I really believe that direct meetings with government officials is far more meaningful and effective. Having done a little bit of it, it's like, they really do. When you're face to face, that they can't hang up on you and all that, right? It's like they have to listen to you, and you get to say your piece.
And that's supported by on the ground protesting, right? Like
Right.
if you were in that meeting and you can say, hey, look, it's not just me having a personal grievance against Scientology. There are people protesting every day outside orgs, or there's this
Yeah.
big annual thing that happens at St. Hill where 50 people show up. Like there's people talking about this all day, every day. It's not just me. Like those protest activities on the ground assist your meeting government officials. Like they all work together in their own weird way to complement each other. That's what I meant at the start when I said there's no right or wrong way to protest. They all aid each other, but
That's
just
right.
think like strategically about what your message is, who you're trying to reach, and what your goal is, like what your end game, right?
That's right. Exactly. And I really cannot stress enough the this is real line in the sand stuff for me, and I really feel it strongly that it should be for everybody doing this activity. Do not break the law.
100%.
Right? Just don't. It can feel intoxicating and wild and crazy, and especially if you're live streaming, to do wild and crazy stuff. It's very attention seeking, and it's great. It'll get eyes on you, but it's in the long term, right? If you think beyond the moment, it's not a good idea, because you're dealing with an organization that is keeping track of everything you're doing when you're standing outside a Church of Scientology. They have, just assume you're being filmed 24/7 when you're out there, and they are keeping track, and they will go after you with the law. Eventually, they'll just keep a tally until they know they've got a case, and then boom, somebody's pulling out the handcuffs, and you're like, what the hell's going on, right?
And
Because you
their
thought you were getting
narrative,
away with it.
yeah, their narrative is that we're all criminals and we're this and that and blah blah blah. So we need to go out of our way to make sure that we're not those things that Scientology say that we are, right?
That's right.
Being
That's right.
kind, being compassionate, offering assistance and help, and standing there saying, look, you're free to believe in what you want, freedom of belief, right? That's the thing enshrined in, you know, our human rights. You're free to be a Scientologist if you want to, but you're not free to abuse people, harm people, you know, coerce people into giving vast sums of money, and, you know, elder abuse, all this other stuff. That's what we're against. And that's what I mean by being legal, knowing the laws, knowing the rules, and playing by the rules only protects you as a protester and just shows Scientology up, because when they do a hate website saying you're a criminal, you have like the message of like, well, no, I'm not, right? I've done nothing wrong. I'm not a criminal. You're just proving them wrong through your actions.
Exactly. Because the second you show up with a protest sign, Scientologists all feel very, very strongly that they know you're a criminal.
Mm.
Now they just need to document it, right? That's how they're looking at you. So that's why they're keeping tally. So prove them wrong.
They're waiting for you to slip up. So they're playing chess. So you've got to play chess right back. They're playing the long game. So we need to as well, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Should we answer some of these questions I've been starting as we've been going through? Petrie Nar was here at the beginning saying, hi, Alex, Chris, and mods. I'm sure this will be another informative and interesting show. Hans Christian Schwartz is here. Becky Big Brother fan says, Chris always comes across as really happy. That's a good thing. Harvey Denton here saying, this is very well timed as I had an encounter with some Scientologists the other day, and then followed that up with Chris. How long were you on the RPF for?
I was on the RPF for 3 years and 3 months. Yeah. And I finished the program. That's why it took so long. I didn't skip. A lot of people way smarter than me left Scientology before they finished that damn program. I got through it. So yeah.
Becky Big Brother fan says, being kind and solution focused is more effective to SEAL members rather than being aggressive to people trapped in a high control group. I agree. I think, look, also just to bear in mind, a lot of ex-members, especially second or third generation ex-Scientologists whose parents are still in, or, you know, who have personal family that they've disconnected from, like, I absolutely get the anger, the frustration, and you are 100% entitled to stand there on the street, scream, yell, and get your anger out. Like, I 100% support that. I'm not saying don't do that at all. I'm kind of more speaking to people who have never been in Scientology who want to protest. If you want to reach people who are in Scientology, then yeah, kindness, compassionate. Say, hey, we're here to help. We're here to support you. That's a different message to the second, third generations who are angry and upset that they've lost their family, which they have every right to feel and to do so, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, there's catharsis in protesting. Absolutely. It just do it smart. Just be smart about it.
Ben Olsen's in the chat saying hi. Hi,
Hey,
Catherine. Thank you so much. Becky Big Brother fan says, I doubt many people are going out of their way to join these days by being recruited on the street outside an org as raw meat. Yeah, that's another thing to consider, is not many people are joining Scientology. So, you know, yes, it's important to stand there and protest and stop people joining. But actually, I think the way to get at Scientology and to stop the abuses isn't through people joining, it's through the people who are currently in and getting them to wake up, which is a different message and a different protest, right?
Absolutely. In fact, let me also throw out, since that just occurred to me, since I work with the Aftermath Foundation, and sometimes I'm answering the phones on the 1-800 line, or I work with people on a peer support level. I get to talk with people who have reached out to there, and those billboards are definitely doing the job. They have worked in getting Scientologists to contact us. So getting out that information to people could be valuable too, in ways you just won't see in the moment. Because people are thinking, and they're not necessarily going to tell you what they're thinking, but they might take the card or they might take the information, and then a week later we're hearing from them. That's happened. So so I just thought I'd throw that out there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And people contact the Aftermath Foundation, and, you know, people contact me, and I'm sure they contact you as well, having seen these videos and being like, hey, I'm under the radar. I'm not ready to speak out publicly, but, you know, I heard this message that resonated with me, and, you know, I'm thinking of leaving, which is great. That's the most important thing, is that messaging getting through, right?
That's right. Exactly. Because it's an abusive organization, right? So people are eventually going to get it in their mind that maybe they shouldn't be part of it.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean you need to ditch the beliefs. You can carry on believing in Scientology if you want to, but not be a part of the abuse and the suffering and the harm. And, you
That's
know,
right.
a lot of people leave the whole thing and throw the beliefs out the window. Absolutely fine. That's what I did. But for a lot of people, they're not quite ready. They're not quite there yet. So, you know, for them, it's about stopping the abuse and getting out of the situation, and then working on, you know, the belief system and the thoughts and all of that. That's a bigger task. But just get yourself out of the harmful situation is the first step.
That's right. In fact, building on that, generally speaking, in a general sense, one of the first layers that people hit in their journey out is something's wrong with this organization. Not with beliefs, not with Hubbard, not with the OT levels, sure as hell not with Xenu. Something's wrong with Miscavige. Something's wrong with the way this organization is running or conducting itself. And those might be key buttons to push with people, as opposed to going deeper in the layers of when people start unraveling it. Then they start going into the beliefs and going into the Hubbard and going into the, wait a minute, all of this is crap. It's very, very rare that somebody's there on day one of having doubts, that they go all the way down to Hubbard and all of that. So meeting them where they're at is also kind of key to the strategy of protesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Michelle Veldman says, thanks for this. They are great points for any protesting. And Chris Shelton's one reel was excellent. I hope we can see some more of those coming soon, Chris.
You will. You
Good.
will. And in fact, you gave me some great ideas on that one. Because I want to do a couple more videos about, you know, hey, look, if you're looking at leaving, or if you just left, here's some things to think about, or some stuff to maybe take a look at, that might help get the wheels turning for them.
Yeah, Absolutely. And last one, I think it's a good one to end it on. Freedom of religion does not give them freedom to ignore local laws. Agree.
Exactly.
Like, freedom of belief is just as important as your freedom of speech, your right to protest. They're all equal. So it's just important to bear in mind that, you know, what we're trying to do is stop the abuse, raise awareness of that. And we're not targeting or harassing individual Scientologists or, you know, judging them because of their beliefs. What we're trying to say is, hey, look, if you want to leave, there's a support network out here. And everyone's way of protesting is right. Yeah, it all contributes to the grander machine. But try and think strategically about it is kind of my end message, I suppose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just since I saw it here, I'll just want to get this thought out real fast, and then we can go. I believe Scientology ultimately is a thought reform activity designed to mentally enslave people. That's how I look at Scientology these days. And I believe I can prove that. I think I can show with the materials themselves how that happens and how that works. I've done that for years on my channel. People coming out initially often aren't there yet. And so telling them that can sometimes keep them in because it's too much. They can't accept that much, that it's that bad. So I try to mitigate that messaging a little bit in talking to people who are first coming out, right? You don't, if you heard me one-on-one with people, you know, it's not about what a cult it is and, you know, and all the satanic rituals. We're not going there, right? Not at all. And I would gladly tell somebody, and have in fact told people who are on the fence, hey, look, there are opportunities for you to still practice Scientology outside the church. There's this whole thing called independent Scientology. And if that moves them away from Scientology officially and gets them out of that organization, I think that's a good thing to do, because I know from experience that after a few months of exposure to all the truth of Scientology, eventually they will move away from it entirely, right? But it's very, very challenging to get everything to a person in one day as to how bad the whole thing is. So just wanted to also throw that out there.
It's planting seeds, isn't it? And, you know, like you said, the anonymous movement, 1 or 2 signs really stuck in your mind. When was the last time you saw your family?
Yes.
You know, you should be paid more than $50 a week. Or when was the last time you got paid, right? Those messages really resonate. And as much as someone's not going to read the sign and be like, oh, that's it, I'm out, and walk straight over and join the protesting, like, it takes time. They're going to walk away and they're going to think about it, and they're going to start, the cogs are going to start turning. And, you know, in a couple of weeks, couple of months, maybe a couple of years, someone will come out and be like, I saw a sign and that's what got me to start thinking, reevaluating, and then eventually leave. So it's not always going to be an instant reward, but playing the long game, thinking strategically with your messaging is what really makes an impact, in my opinion. But
awesome.
Chris, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody who watched. And don't forget to press the like button, leave a comment down below. And if you're watching on my channel, subscribe to Chris's channel. I've left the link to that in the description. And we'll catch you on the next one. Bye for now.
Bye, guys.